Evergrande is the second biggest Chinese property developer. You may have heard of its name in the past few months, but it never got enough attention from the Western media, so there's a lot of confusion regarding what is happening with it, how it can impact the global market, and what possible solutions can solve this ticking time bomb that may affect all of us. Experts say it might be worse than the 2008 housing crisis. Hi and welcome to Josh Soros channel. I'm fairly new, so if you enjoy the informative videos that cover any recent relevant events, then subscribe to have my videos show up in your subscription feed. And let's dive in. On Monday, 3rd of January, Evergrande were told to demolish 39 buildings in the next 10 days in Hainan, a southern district in China. And as a result, Evergrande has been suspended from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange as investors await news on its restructuring plan. But the suspension was temporary, as the next day the trades resumed as normal and in fact even rose by 10% because of the news. So what is the deal with Evergrande? Well, it's not the only Chinese developer stock that dropped off a cliff in recent weeks. And here is how it can impact the US market and bring in a catastrophe if the Chinese government doesn't deal with it accordingly. Evergrande built up its real estate empire through leveraged properties and issuing US-denominated junk bonds. Assets and equity boomed over the past decade, unlike net income, and the reason is debated, but it seems its leveraged properties were getting very little actual revenue growth in Evergrande's empire. This means they were overvalued. And this strategy of growth worked until the pandemic hit in March 2020, because Evergrande relied a lot on their commercial and tourism properties. The pandemic stopped people from bringing in revenue to those few places Evergrande owned, and it's estimated that Evergrande now managed to rack up $300 billion in debt. $300 billion is not a small number by any means, because there are countries like Ireland, Denmark and Hong Kong where their whole national GDP is smaller than the $300 billion debt, and this is just the debt Evergrande managed to collect. And the worst thing is Evergrande doesn't have enough capital to service the interest payments on their loans, never mind paying down their principals. This means they have no way of getting rid of those loans. They will grow endlessly until Evergrande takes some other plan to tackle it. And they actually tried doing it. They quite literally started liquidating their own property. And when a player as large as Evergrande tries to liquidate their assets because of their collateral damage, the real estate property will sink in value. It will inevitably cause the asset to lose a lot of value, meaning Evergrande will be in an endless spiral, decreasing the value of their assets if they keep on selling it. Evergrande is so large that if they start selling their properties, it will drive the whole price in the area down with it, and it owns 2% of China's real estate, so this had to lead the Chinese issued bonds from nearly all real estate developers to sink. And that's excluding how Evergrande itself is diving off a cliff all of this time as well. And now the creditors don't want to accept their bonds and are demanding payments made, and aggressive restructuring options are being reviewed. But with all of this information, how are we going to be affected by it? Why should you care what a Chinese real estate company that has 2% of China real estate is doing? Well, on September 15th, 2008, the Lehman Brothers collapsed, dissolving $600 billion in US assets, leading us to the worst market crash since the Great Depression. That is $600 billion in assets. And did you know Evergrande has $500 billion in total? $200 billion assets and $300 billion in unserviced debt. It's pretty much nearby level of the Lehman Brothers had. This is really not good news if it really goes down sideways. The Lehman Brothers was a US bank that was diversified across many industries. Evergrande is just one industry, but its debt is held across banks in China, the US, Canada, and Australia. This means the banks of these countries will still be affected. If you live outside of these countries, you still will be affected because US and China essentially hold the world together. And the timing could not be any worse because currently we are seeing an artificial inflation-driven market. It is highly overvalued, and when it actually starts to drop down, it will go down hard. And it won't only cause defaults on bonds, it will also mean billions of dollars unpaid to the Chinese contractors and goods suppliers. And this means it will be the biggest ever bulk of real estate liquidation we've ever seen if Evergrande does go under. The real estate collapse means assets, sheets of other real estate developers, banks and mortgage companies in China will all crumble. If you were present in the 2008 US crash, you will remember big empty houses, vacant with nobody living inside of them. This will be 100 times worse than that. But then we also have to remember Chinese has 15% of all global debt. It owns it, so it will definitely try to collect it more aggressively since they have an internal crisis, and this debt is likely owned by some overseas banks and funds that own Evergrande bonds. What this all comes down to is China taxing its citizens to pay off the huge bailouts. There is hope that the CCP may step in and bail out Evergrande. It will cost a ton and China will be the one picking up the garbage Evergrande left behind. But with how China's internal policies are set up, it is a very likable outcome. But if they decide not to, then the market will see a drop that we've never seen in its history. The cards are all set up for this perfect storm. We're sitting on a powder keg of weak economic involvement, but stocks massively overvalued. And if China doesn't act, then we will have to pay. The question of a large correction is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when and how bad. That correction could be soon or it could be in years from now, but it will eventually happen, and the longer it takes, the worse it gets. But there are unique events that can make the collapse a lot worse for the world. Evergrande is just a large factor in one of them. But it all comes down to the Chinese government and what it will do, and if the Chinese real estate market actually has enough demand to keep these assets afloat. This is it for this piece of video essay. I hope you got a better understanding of all that's happened with Evergrande and what it may entail. Watch my other videos to find out more about business, economics and everything in between. Thanks for watching and be sure to subscribe not to miss my other videos.